Welcome to the Destiny of Manufacturing podcast, powered by, of course, the Precision Metal Forming Association. I am your host, Dean Phillips. I am the technical director here at the PMA, as well as the host of this show. So I'm glad to have all of you with me. With me today, from, of course, Wipfli, our partner, and the partner there is, of course, Laurie Harbour. Laurie, welcome.
Steve, it's great to be here.
Right off the bat, I know we always like to talk about what is your big takeaway for the next 5 years? What are some of the things that we need to address today so that we can continue being in business 5 years from now?
Right. Well, it's an interesting time because business is changing quite a bit with the new administration, and that's both good and positive and negative in some cases. But as you look out 5 years, you have to really look very tactically at the first sort of 12, 18, 24 months, being flexible with your business strategy, focusing on sales. I know you and I have talked about this before. Sales is a huge opportunity for manufacturers today. And then navigating the dynamics of what's going on with the administration, tax policy, tariff and trade, staying close to the things you're putting out and the PMA is putting out to really know how it affects us day in and day out. That's super critical right now.
Yeah. Staying in that vein, talking about where business is, you had mentioned at your presentation that was at the stamping conference here not too long ago in Nashville, talking about swim lanes. Can you elaborate and explain to people, for those that weren't there, what kinds of, how that impacts your business and what you need to look at?
Every single stamping company or manufacturing company in general operates with a set of customers and parts, and those tend to fall in what we call different swim lanes. So you could have a very high mix, very low volume set of parts where you're changing tools a lot and putting new dies in, but running low volume, versus a set of parts that runs at very, very high volume with lower mix, right? And some have a combination of both. And so we always encourage people to use their data and information in their ERP systems and within their business of running parts, understand the dynamics of those part by part profitability, part by part hours on a press, and then work to schedule and manage those things more effectively. And when we do that, we can then group parts in a better fashion to allow for more scheduling efficiency, which then on the sales side allows me to bring in more parts, right? So if I can run more effectively and efficiently within a certain swim lane, I open up the ability to bring in new parts and new opportunities that may be at a better margin. And for those that are at a poor margin, we want to find ways to either increase the price or potentially give those back to our customer, what we would call kind of weed the garden, so we can allow the more profitable parts to come into our business. It's not an easy task, but an important one to really help drive profitability.
Yeah, I really like that, because I look back at one of the companies I used to work for years ago, and they had an assortment of products that they built. And I said to them, I said, what do you want to price this at in the marketplace? And they said, well, what does this competitor charge? And I think at that time I said, it's 17,500. Okay, we want to charge 17,300. They had no idea if they could build it for that. Had no idea how much things cost. Yes, they could show that they were profitable compared to last year, that they had more money in their account than they had than the year before. But it doesn't mean that the mix that you're bringing in is the right mix. You can be losing money over here and making money here, but that winds up balancing out, and you start to be not as effective in your business model as you'd like to be. How can companies look at that and try to make smarter decisions?
The key to that is also to consistently look at that data, because what you're describing is absolutely dead on to what we see in most manufacturing companies. But we might have won some of this work 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and costs have changed, wage rates have increased, and pretty much every line item of our income statement has increased since COVID with just costs going up, inflationary. So we need to constantly be relooking at those parts. What might have been really good when we first landed it may have a different cost model now, or maybe I'm not running it in the same way that I quoted it. Maybe I'm running less efficiently or less cycle time. So we always encourage, operations and sales have to be linked at the hip, which sometimes is not always what people love to do. Sales loves to sell and fill the plant with stuff. Operations loves for you to fill it with things that run really efficiently in our plant. So if we're constantly looking at those things and measuring that part by part efficiency and profitability, we can then look at what we sometimes call the dirty dozen. Which ones are not making the money we'd love for them to make? Can we make them more efficient? Can we reprice them? Or is it time for us to talk to our customer about maybe taking those parts back? And so it's, again, not an easy exercise, but if you can constantly look at it together with sales and operations, we can make better decisions, improve as we go, and then also quote more effectively the first time, or as costs have increased, make sure we're taking those into account.
Hmm. So if I understand you correctly, one of the areas that most companies need to start is having that dialogue internally between their sales department and their operations department that perhaps they haven't been doing in the past.
Absolutely, absolutely, and helping to understand, because it's no one department's challenge alone, right? It's we may have priced a new product in a way that would allow us to win, say, a new customer, a new logo into our business. So it may not be as high of a profit margin, but it enters us into the door and allows us to quote a lot of new activity. So operations has to work with sales to say, okay, let me work to make this more efficient so we do make more money on it. And then other times, we have things that we bring in that maybe just were not priced right, or maybe we could price better if we knew we could put it into an empty machine that doesn't require any additional cost. We have the people, and we could even lower the price to win it, but it would drive contribution margin in our business. So the constant communication, instead of battling each other, but yet having what I like to call constructive conflict, challenging each other to take on the right work to fill our plant so that we can be more efficient and make better profitability.
Yeah. I used to see there was a fly in the ointment that I used to see when tool and die companies would enter into the stamping marketplace. Excuse me. And the reason is because they weren't in business to be a stamping house. They were selling the tool, and they just had available time on a machine. So since the machine was sitting there, they didn't have the same rate for that machine that somebody who was in the stamping marketplace would. Consequently, they would always bid low because they just wanted to fill up some time while they were building tools over here. Why not run some work for somebody else and make a few bucks?
Right.
But from a business model, that always messed up all the other companies. Are like, well, I don't know how they could be stamping it for this. And they really weren't. They weren't stamping it for that price, but their business model was so distorted because they were a tool and die builder. They were not in the business of stamping. It was a side hustle, so to speak, of their existing equipment. It's like, well, I got this car, I can go deliver for Uber because I've got time. The car's sitting there. I'm paying for it anyways. But not understanding your business model, how much gas costs, not understanding all the other elements of it to say, is this really the right business for you? How can people look at value-added processes within manufacturing so that you're giving them a completed assembly instead of just a stamped out part? How do they approach that and look at it and build that into what they want to achieve at the end of the day?
Well, that also comes back down to strategically how you want to run the business. And what I mean by that is some companies do value added, weld assemblies. They'll make multiple parts. They'll add, different types of attachments to it. Some even overmold stamped parts, they'll mold stampers that are PMA members will overmold, they'll stamp and then overmold it. So if you're able to design the system and the process correctly, you can overmold, you can add weld assemblies and what you would call value added things and price them correctly with the right customers to make very good money. Others do very well with high volume, low mix, sort of stamp and ship, right? Drop it in a box and be able to send parts out. So it really comes down to your strategy as a manufacturer, what customers you're servicing and what they hope to get from you in terms of value added assembly. And truth is, it makes it a little less commoditized if you're adding some value added assembly. But again, you got to do it right because that requires additional labor. So, what you're talking about with the tool and die shops is exactly that sort of mentality of contribution margin. I have the people, I have the equipment, but they're empty. So I go put something in it and I can make some money, even though I'm not really a stamper and probably aren't doing it well, but I probably added some cash flow into my business, right? But if I built that as a solid, like that's the only way that I filled my plant, likely that would catch up to me and I would not be pricing correctly in the marketplace. And it would eventually it would impact my profitability negatively. So you really have to evaluate the value stream when you're looking at your strategy and how deep you want to go, because that's the value back to your customer, making you so sticky that they can't leave you because you're good at those things.
Yeah, that's a great point. And tell us, I know that you have obviously with your company, you guys focus on data and information. How important is it for companies to understand their data today?
It's probably the number one most critical issue from our perspective. A lot of companies have invested a tremendous amount of money in ERP systems and CRMs and engineering software, things that allow them to do their job more efficiently. But we don't always take the data from that and make it information. What metrics are most important for us to look at? How far do we drill into the data to find the problems so that we can become problem solvers? So when I mentioned before, looking at customer by customer profitability, customer by part profitability, how many hours does it take on my machine? It's what we call a process quantity analysis, where we dig deeper and deeper and deeper to find the story in the data. So, a lot of companies will have 5 to 10 companies that make up 80% of their revenue, but they'll have 100 or 200 other customers and part numbers that make up only 10 or 20% of their revenue. And a lot of times we think we're pricing those parts right, but we're not necessarily getting the true value at a ABC cost level. And that's where the waste creeps into our manufacturing plant. So it's really diving into that data, understanding it, because I might have a customer that makes up my top 5, but I might have 10 of his parts that are in what I call the bottom tail of my business that I have to keep because he's my number one customer. So then the question is, how do I run them differently or schedule them differently to be more efficient? So you learn to manage it, not necessarily get rid of them. So it's just a constant look at challenging the organization to say, what is our data telling us and what decisions should we make from it?
Yeah. How effective are we being the metal forming industry, at making smarter decisions today than let's say 5 years ago?
Certainly much better than we were 5 or 10 years ago, because we do have technology that is smarter every day, smarter than it was, yesterday, and giving us that information. So, there's a lot of good metal formers that are really utilizing their data systems. They have machine monitoring systems that are telling us, why is the press down, or why is my CNC machine down, and Paretoing those losses of uptime and then being able to problem solve those. It's that sometimes we don't always leverage the technology we purchased to make it information. That's the gap, right? And
Mhm.
so we see some of the best metal formers that have, these young process engineers or young people that are good at data analytics that don't necessarily have a prefabricated notion of what the answer is because they haven't been in stamping for 40 years. And they
Right.
read the data and say, this is what the data is telling me. Let's go try to problem solve that, as opposed to sort of the experiential 40 year expert in stamping, right? We need both. We need both to
Mhm.
collaborate to solve problems.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I do believe in a fresh set of eyes adds value within your company. I'm a huge fan of either having mastermind groups where you have within PMA. A lot of times we have networking groups that will go and visit each other's plants and can
Right.
offer a fresh set of eyes, business perspectives, and things like that that can really help you. And at the same time, there's I've gone into plants and the roof's leaking and
Mhm.
everybody just starts to walk around it. There's a bucket there now, and then people just start walking around it, and they can't even see it. They get a scotoma where they can't even see it anymore because they've it's become oblivious to them. And somebody else comes in and says, "Oh, it looks like you got a roof leak in your roof," and they're like, "Oh, yeah, that's right." But they haven't seen it in so long because they just walk around it. And I see it in plants all the time. And I mean, that's just a extreme perspective, but there's other things, people walking by scrap, people walking by trash, not performing their 5S systems and they're not doing the lean process. Many companies think they have arrived. They were lean practitioners when they started, and it kind of waned and drifted off because they weren't getting the big returns anymore. That low hanging fruit was all gone, and now they stopped doing the little things consistently. Plan, do, check, act. They stopped doing that, and consequently, they pay the price in the long run because quality suffers, performance suffers, efficiency suffers, and in the long term, they're not able to make those achievements anymore. How do we get to a point where we understand that this isn't a destination? It's a continuous work to take this information and build upon it to execute these tasks. How do
Yeah.
we get to a different mindset?
It's a great question. It is something that I think we all grapple with every day, and that is also happening more and more in companies as they're turning over their ownership. And the average age of owners today is 64, 65 years of age, and so some of them have succession plans, some of them don't. And so it's a super big challenge to figure out how do we evolve that culture. And I bring up that younger generation because that is the future of our metal forming companies and manufacturers throughout our country, right? And so, but we have to connect them with that experienced generation before they leave us. We can't lose that tribal knowledge, but as one of those older folks, we also have to embrace the younger people coming in with new ideas and premises to really drive the business to the next level. I mean, my partner Scott Walton and I wrote a book on this last year about how do we take the tribal knowledge and the newer generation and bring manufacturing to a thriving place, right? We are looking at a lot of changes in manufacturing that are business friendly for manufacturers in our country, and so we want to be able to. We call it tradition meets transformation, right? How do we transform manufacturing through this process? But it's a very critical mindset, and a lot of the older generation believes that they have all the answers, right? And we really need to open up our mindset to how do we tackle that data and information that we made gut-based decisions 20 years ago when we didn't have that kind of data, and then use it to then apply what I know tribally in my experience to help solve that problem. We do have to get back to the basics. We've kind of overcomplicated manufacturing, and when now you've got volumes down, going back to kind of pre-COVID levels of demand,
Mhm.
and in a market where all of our costs are up, we've got to be able to tackle sort of, engineering 101 and get back to efficiency at levels that we can, fight globally.
Yeah. And along those same lines, that's one of the big complaints I hear all the time. Now, of course, I'm on the technical side and on the training side, so I hear it probably a little bit more than a lot of people. But there's no question workforce development is such a huge issue, and finding solutions really needs to be what we're in the business of, is finding solutions, not just saying, well, we can't find people, we don't have the skills to train somebody, we can't transfer that tribal knowledge.
Mm.
And people want, in the past, could go to the magic bullet and say, I'm just going to offer my competitor's employee more money. Well, that person's just not out there, and there's less and less of those people. So you have to have a plan of how you're going to solve this, not with just, you have to start thinking outside of the box, and you have to start going back to that root level of developing talent. Where do you see that, and how do we really get in that mindset of developing talent?
And you're spot on, and you mentioned it earlier. This sort of master class. I mean, I have some clients who meet monthly with a cross functional group of people to do nothing but brainstorm. Right, so they're pulling the young person off the floor, someone out of quality engineering, older and younger people, different backgrounds of people, so that they can put them in a room and say, what can we do better? What can we do differently? Or I have one client who's working on his 2035 plan, and he has created a strategy team that you would think is your core executive team, but it's not. It's this group of people from all walks of life in the company, so that he can hear from, what does the 23-year-old who's been here 2 years think we could do better, versus the tribal knowledge person. And it's not to solve problems, but to brainstorm.
Right.
And so I think, this generation, first of all, we got to continue to show them manufacturing is a pretty cool place to be. There's a lot of smart technology. We got to keep fighting the good fight of getting people excited about coming to work in our press rooms and in our die shops. And then we have to engage them when they get there. They want to make an impact. So they want to know their voice is heard. And if we listen to them, we can't implement everything that they think is a great idea, but we have to bring them in and gather the ideas. And those people who allow them to have a voice are really, you can see it hitting their bottom line in their companies.
Yeah, and that's tremendous. And I have identified that, going back to your why. You need to make sure that people
Mm,
understand their why, understand
absolutely.
why they're in this industry, understanding how what you do is important and vital. And I think sometimes we lose that, going to the extreme of explaining the why part. Instead, here's what your job is. Here's what you need to do, or how you need to do it, why you're doing it. I used to say this when I worked for a company that did safety controls, and that I'm in the business of saving lives. That's what my business was, to make sure that more people went home with all their fingers, and made sure that they could potentially keep all their people safe and well. That was my job. That's how I understood it to be. But sometimes people in our industry don't understand the impacts that they have and why it's important. Uh, and
I
I
agree with
think
you. I agree. I
you're,
agree with you completely. It's a big
yeah.
deal. When we know the why, we're more motivated around the cause, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Lori, thank you so much for being here today. Tell people how they can get in touch with you.
Well, you can reach me at Laurie.Harbour@wipfli.com, WIPFLI. And I'm going to be speaking at the PMA Forming the Future event, so down in Puerto Rico. So I hope all of our PMA members are going to go to that great event. It's got a phenomenal agenda. So I'm looking forward to seeing everybody down in Puerto Rico.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us today, and you take care.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Take care to you.